Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome to an online presentation from Biometric Update. We discuss the hot topics and important issues in biometrics and digital identity. I'm your host and the managing editor of Biometric Update, Chris Burt. Today, we're going to talk about SecureFaces, a privacy-centric approach to biometric authentication. Now, as I'm sure most of you or all of you know, privacy and data protection are consistently named among the top concerns, posing barriers to the adoption of biometrics. Businesses often worry about the compliance implications, fraud risk, and potential reputational damage if they suffer a data breach that involves biometrics and sensitive personal data. And consumers have expressed hesitance to trust businesses with their sensitive data with some justification. Yet at the same time, MasterCard's Les Matthews recently noted in a keynote at the Secure Technology Alliance's Identity and Payments Summit that 86% of consumers globally are worried about identity fraud losses. So we need to use these technologies. So we're going to discuss today the factors behind consumers and businesses' concerns, which ones are legitimate and how they can be addressed today, with two very highly knowledgeable leaders in the field. I'd like to welcome Blair Cohen, founder and president of Authentic ID, which provides complete automated identity proofing and fraud detection. Authentic ID provides a proprietary machine learning platform for KYC checks, biometric authentication, and more. How are you today, Blair?
I am doing fantastic and pleased to be here with you today, Chris, and the lovely Francis, who I've known for a decade or so.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. And Francis Zelazny is the co-founder and CEO of Anonybit, which has been making waves with its innovative technology for decentralized data storage. The company offers a proprietary machine learning platform, offers an identity management platform engineered for strong authentication throughout the user life cycle. How are you doing today, Francis?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to the discussion. Thank you for having me, and always a pleasure to be with Blair.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both for joining us. Really looking forward to this discussion as well. But before we get into it, I want to cover a few quick housekeeping items. We are recording this presentation, so all of you lucky attendees will be emailed the link, so you can watch afterwards, catch a portion that you unfortunately miss if you have to step away, or just rewatch your favorite part or share it with a friend. We are also going to address the questions that you have, so please feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation using the tab at the bottom of your screen. We're going to get to as many of the questions as we are able at the end, but if we run out of time, we will definitely have opportunity for you to reach out to both Blair and Francis. And I actually want to note on that same point that I have just dropped a couple of links into the chat, which is generally disabled, but you can check there for links to demos offered by both Authentic ID and Anonybit. So please do check those out. Ask any questions, fire away, and we will get to them at the end. So on that note, let's start the discussion by looking at some of the fraud trends that we're seeing in the industry. So Blair, can you maybe start us off with some of the new trends that you're observing?
Yeah, after 33 years in doing identity, I do need to talk about the newer trends. It's more dramatically over the past 33 years, as you can imagine, everything from the traditional stuff to the much more sophisticated fraud attempts that we're seeing today. And generally those are committed with Gen AI. I mean, I go to conferences all over the place and every other session has to have AI in it or the session wasn't worthwhile. But we're literally seeing this being put to use at great scale. We see Gen AI created fake documents by the thousands every day. we see Gen AI created faces on these documents that are synthetic people. These are people that have never existed anywhere in the world, and they generally, breach data, get freshly breached data, create an identity document that says they're that person, and then put a synthetic face on that document and submit it, as you see here. This guy certainly doesn't look like the beautiful girl that he's holding up to the camera, but he's been approved for a loan because he's a deep fake. Go to the next slide if you can, Chris, because I think this is a really good illustration of how good this technology has gotten and how vulnerable we all are. And keep in mind that Gen AI isn't just faces. It's voices, it's documents, it's pretty much anything that you can imagine, from to prove an identity standpoint, can be created synthetically. So here is a pretty good example, but just want to talk on some of the stats here. So 85% of all Authentic IDs customers last year experienced synthetic identity fraud. So again, this is a synthetic identity. This is not a real person. It's a Frankenstein monster of pieces of Francis and pieces of Blair that have been put together, and then it's asserted as this new synthetic identity. And it's, we're seeing dramatic rises in that. 85% of all of our customers and 47% of all of our customers reported growth in synthetic identity fraud last year. And here's why. If you look at those 6 images on the left-hand side of this screen, 5 of them are completely fake. These are the synthetic faces that I've been talking about that don't exist. These are not real people. 1 of them is real. And I'd love to challenge the audience right now to go into chat and put in your vote for which one of those is the real face.
Have we
How
got
much longer should we give them?
Have we got the chat enabled for people to do that? We may not. I may have undermined that.
It's an ad lib on my part, so my bad, Chris. But curious to see what everybody chooses at the end.
Thank you, Jay, who just dropped into the Q&A, and David, guesses for number 5 and number 3. Good thinking, gentlemen.
Love to see
Got
some
another
more.
guess for number 5, 2. Couple of guesses for 2. All right. Another for 5. I am going to chime in on number 5 as well, personally. That's my guess. Another one for 5.
I am watching all the answers as they come in, and so far, I don't want to give a hint away, but not a single person's gotten the answer correct. I know we didn't intend to spend that much time on this one, Chris, but it's number 4 is the real face out of all of these 6. Number 4 is the real person. So that's how easy it is, guys. I couldn't have gotten this either. I actually took this test before I knew the answer, and I guessed number 5 as well. So, humans are completely vulnerable to this. It takes very sophisticated technology to detect these deep fakes, to detect this generative AI technology. Humans, it's impossible. And it's proof because I saw many of the names that were on this webinar today, and most of them are fraud experts and have been doing this for quite some time, and nobody got it right. So that should be an alarm to everybody on this webinar.
Absolutely. Very illustrative. We can clearly see what that problem is, but I mean, this new set of challenges goes along with a long tail of challenges and builds on problems that have been, familiar within the industry for many, many years, right? So Francis, can you maybe expand on what Blair was saying and bring in how sort of traditional threats are contributing to this this landscape that we're all trying to deal with today?
Yeah, so I think what Blair was saying about creating Frankenstein identities, that was an interesting one, Blair. Create a Frankenstein of half Francis, half Blair. I'm gonna think about that.
Bad example.
But that would really be a Frankenstein. But I think this notion of the whole idea of taking like real information and attaching it to fake information is this whole concept around synthetic and why synthetics can even exist, because most of the way we are verifying identities have to do with static databases.
Mhm.
And these static databases have been breached time and time and time again, and making this problem more and more compounded. And then, of course, when you include the element that Blair was just showing, it's really can be very overwhelming. So just throwing more statistics out. I was looking at, how data breaches have manifested themselves over the years. And I think the first year that data breaches were tracked was 2004. And we see the acceleration over time with, I think, 20% of all data breaches of all time have just occurred just in the last couple of years. So what that clearly tells you is that there's money to be made in data breaches. And obviously there's a whole underworld, the dark web, that is dealing with this stolen data. Another interesting statistic that I read about these data breaches is that per capita, the US is #1 in the world. So just think about that. And on average, everybody in the US has had something like 38 data points available, circulating about them. And we didn't need any new reminders, except this weekend, we just had like the new news from AT&T. And so when I think about these data breaches, I think like, okay, oh no, not again. But what I think we all think of that, but the hidden story behind these data breaches, especially the ones that involve the type of sensitive information, is that, especially like a mobile carrier, is the whole ecosystem that relies on these, on the mobile phone, on the phone number for authentication. So now any hacker that has access to the information can call, have a SIM reset. This is now spurring a new threat, SIM swaps, and anyone who has two-factor authentication with the code going to this phone number is vulnerable. So this all of these data breaches and all of these databases that exist all contribute to an ecosystem that really puts all of us at risk. And the more we rely on this data for authentication, the more, again, the problem is compounded.
And yeah, as we experience these the drumbeat, let's say, of breaches, the response from businesses and from providers of identity management technology and biometrics, what we're seeing is a variety of approaches brought to the table, right? And some of those are relatively old, like the two-factor authentication you just referred to, that is so easily compromised in SIM swaps if you have the right data, have stolen the right data or acquired the right data of a victim, to very new and advanced and sophisticated fraud prevention technologies. So I'd actually like to run a poll right now. We're going to ask those of you watching and listening along what kind of security technologies you are applying to fight fraud in the customer life cycle. So we've got biometric authentication, ID verification technologies, behavioral biometrics, real-time transaction monitoring, risk scoring, and device fingerprinting. So want to give everyone a minute or two to select all that apply. And we'll have a look in just a minute here at what the most popular technologies are. Yeah, I'd actually like to just invite both of you, Blair and Francis, to weigh in or give any predictions or reactions to our list here. Any interjections before we see the results?
I think most of our audience is probably using all of the modalities that you listed there, is going to be my prediction. I think they're all going to have high scores. Hopefully, biometric authentication and identity verification technologies are at the top, given that Authentic ID and Anonybit are producing this webinar. So we will see. What do you think, Francis?
I think that biometric authentication will be a laggard because people are afraid of managing and storing biometrics. And I think depending on the industries that are represented on the call, obviously real-time monitoring and behavior is much more in the financial and risk scoring, of course, is more in the financial arena. So I think it will be more distributed. We'll see.
All right, I think that's it's been about enough time for everyone to click some boxes. So let's see what we've got here. Okay, well, a real distribution for sure, and biometric authentication noteworthy both for being the most adopted, but also 7 out of 23 apparently not using it. So so there's a real gap there. And if this is a technology that these customers could benefit from, I would imagine that, Francis, you have already identified the reason for their hesitancy. So let's leave that up there for a moment. And let's talk
please
about...
do, because I just want to point out that my predictions were correct on this one.
Were
so
correct.
Keep that up for just a second.
But I feel like we need to double click on that because biometric authentication is, could be getting into your phone. There's a lot of things around that. So I think that is that there's a nuance there that I'd love to double click, but I also think that what I said around the folks around behavior transaction risk scoring is probably representing the 1/3 they're on the phone from financial services.
That's right. So we're getting an indication of who our audience is today and what their priorities are as well, right?
Yeah,
absolutely.
So you mentioned, Francis, the different ways that even within biometric authentication, this could be native device biometrics. It could be, we make people use their native authentication as a security mechanism. These things are actually designed as convenience mechanisms. So the security value of that, I know, is a somewhat contentious topic, and how much utility they're really bringing to the table. So could you delve into that a little bit for us, Francis? Not just in terms of the on-device versus off-device, but what are the different architectures and approaches that businesses are bringing to the table, and why did Anonybit land on the approach that you bring?
Yeah, so I think one major trend that we're seeing in the industry is this combination of ID verification technology with biometric authentication in different forms. A lot of people may have heard of a technique or a product or approach called verifiable credentials. These are essentially credentials that are digitized, trusted credentials that are tied to a trusted process of identity verification up front, and then you would use this credential. Most of these credentials are used in the either in a transaction where you don't want to hand over all of the information, like in a e-commerce situation where you don't necessarily want to hand over all of your personal information to a merchant, or in an age verification scenario where your identity has already been verified by somebody else, but you just want to hand over your age so that you can get into the bar. and similar kinds of things. In enterprise authentication, in my mind, and this is where I think there's a lot of nuance into when people say authentication. So biometric authentication by definition is one-to-one matching of a biometric that could be used across different in different places. So if you want to flash the next slide, Chris, in the digital onboarding process, where many people are familiar with using identity verification, no, not the next one, sorry, the identity verification process, which is Blair's, which is what Blair, I think we have a different slide. Okay. You can back. So we have a concept of digital onboarding where we are where we use Blair's technology for identity verification, comparing a driver's license, and then validating the license. And Blair can talk about this a lot more, but part of that process involves a biometric authentication, verifying that the selfie is matching the picture that's on the license. That's one kind of manifestation of biometric authentication. When Anonybit is talking about biometric authentication, we are talking about downstream in the user lifecycle, more around after the person has been onboarded. So you want to get into your account, you want to conduct a wire, you have a step up, you're calling a help desk. So something in the customer lifecycle, user lifecycle that requires authentication. This is a one-to-one match. You're not revalidating the person's identity over and over and over again with the driver's license process for a whole variety of reasons. This is the part where that has forced the conversation around storage and management of biometrics, because typically in the digital onboarding process, when you're doing that authentication, the selfie and the information necessarily is not kept. But enterprise usage for authentication requires you to store and manage. And this is where a lot of the hesitation is. So the reason that Anonybit chose the approach that we did is that we wanted to enable what we call the circle of identity. This is a full life cycle from onboarding through authentication and account recovery. And in order to enable that, you need to store the biometrics. And this is, of course, it's not theoretical. We've seen many, many different data breaches. We talked about the statistics, but being able to overcome the reticence of storing the biometric is what will unleash, again, what I call the circle of identity. And then we started thinking about how to do this so that you can run all kinds of biometric functions, not only one-to-one, but also what we call one-to-many, which enables block listing and deduplication. Also being able to store and manage other personal data that is collected in that process. So when an enterprise needs to manage the customer lifecycle, they have the biometrics and also the other identity information they need in order to enable that without having to start all over again or worrying about creating multiple identities that then have to be sorted out.
Very good. So you have options, but they are not all up to all of the various tasks that you may set for them, right? Mm-hmm. So Blair, can I ask you then to weigh in on how authentic IDs, biometric authentication can mitigate some of these fraud trends that we've been discussing, and you know how this also plays out for the end user to perform these kind of authentication without introducing these risks.
Yeah, I'd love to. If you could go back one slide, I think it's time. We've been scaring people to death so far. So I want to assure them that you don't need to be so scared. Between Francis and I, we think we've got all these problems covered for the most part. So the way that it looks for an end user, instead of answering a bunch of knowledge-based authentication questions, which, I mean, Francis drove home the point of the data breaches. NIST has been advising against using KBA out of wallet questions now since 2016. But people still do it today. And on average, that takes 40, 45 seconds and ultimately results in a lot of frustration. Most real people can't answer those questions. Most fraudsters can. In fact, a good signal of fraud is 100% responses or answers, correct answers to those questions. So it's kind of ironic. So as a better way of proving identity, instead of using something you know, we use something you have, something that most people keep in their custody and don't let loose of custody of that document, and that's your government issued identity document. And then something else that's very hard to steal, if not impossible in this case, we also use your face. So it's something you have and something that you are versus something that you know. And the process, the way that it works, Chris, is super simple. You simply hold your camera up to your identity document. We've made this process completely dummy proof. As soon as the camera senses a document's in front of it, it automatically starts analyzing frame by frame. And as soon as it senses optimal conditions for focus and glare, make sure that a headshot's on the front of the document as we instruct, and the resolution is correct, it just automatically snaps for the user. And when that happens, we run that identity document through a series of hundreds of different tests, depending on where the ID emanated from. So we have unique algorithms for every identity document on the globe. We support about 6,000 of those. So we're able to run a forensic analysis on the document to make sure that all the security features that we expect to see there are there, that we get the right color response from those, that they're precisely placed. Same thing with all the patterns on the document. We look to make sure that the headshot has not been replaced. There are a lot of different techniques that fraudsters use to modify and manipulate headshots and identity documents, splices, stitches, blurs. We have algorithms for all that. So we make sure that the headshot really hasn't been manipulated on the document itself. So they're really doing just that, taking a picture of their identity document, taking a picture of their face. When you take a picture of your face, I talked a lot about Gen AI initially, and that's where we typically see it manifest is with faces. But our technologies, iBeta, PAD 2, penetration attack detection, level 2, the highest level that you can obtain from iBeta or any testing authority. So they essentially have hundreds of hackers that try hundreds of different attempts at trying to spoof your algorithm and see if they can get a 3D mask through, if they can get a printed photo or a video replay of me up on screen through this thing to show that I'm live. And we're quite resilient against all of those synthetic images, if you will. You have to be a real live human present in that moment in time in order to pass that test. And you have to have a legitimate identity document in order to pass the first test. So we're down to about 6 seconds turnaround time on that whole process, completely automated, never have a human look at it. We decision roughly 98% of the images that we see coming through, which is far higher than KBA or any other modality that I can think of. So from a convenience standpoint for the consumer, it's super simple. From a fraud standpoint for our customers, it's virtually eliminated. Most fraud starts with identity. And if you can eliminate that attack up front, you've dramatically reduced your fraud vectors. So that's kind of what it looks like today.
Great, thank you for that explanation, Blair. It's 6 seconds, probably quite acceptable for someone to secure their personal data, ensure that they are the one who has access to whether it's a company resource, their bank account, etc., and at the same time checks all the boxes that on the business's side they're trying to manage, right, in terms of regulatory compliance and heading those fraud attempts off at the pass, right?
That's a really good point. I think that document authentication face matching has been wrongly placed in this area of friction. It's been perceived as friction, but the reality is it's not. It improves conversions pretty dramatically, improves abandonment pretty dramatically. It's a very, very simple process that gives consumers confidence that
Mhm.
their identity is being protected. And it gives our customers confidence that they know exactly who's transacting versus usernames and passwords or KBA questions or PINs or MFAs or any of the more vulnerable methods of proving identity.
Absolutely. So at this point in our, if we imagine a scenario, we've got our user, our staff, or our customers onboarded. We know who they are. We have strong assurance that we're protected from fraud, but we want to continue interacting. So we're going to, I think, as we go along, talk more about confidence, both in terms of consumer confidence and businesses. But where that often breaks down is we've got this data now, and the threat of hacking, as we've been discussing all along, is rears its head at this point. Decentralization of data has become a very popular idea within the industry for mitigating this threat. And I was actually thinking earlier, Francis, when you were talking about the AT&T threat, AT&T breach, and the implications that can have in terms of, for instance, SIM swaps. ATIS, which is an industry body for telecoms, just came out with a paper in which they talk about mitigating SIM swaps via decentralization. And that paper talks a lot about self-sovereign identity. That's not not all decentralization counts as self-sovereign, right? So there is some nuance and complication there. Can you maybe help us navigate those different approaches to decentralization a little bit, and what makes Anonybit's approach stand out?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit before about verifiable credentials. These are self-sovereign identity. There's a whole class of digitized credentials that take what Blair has come up with, what he's talking about in the digital onboarding, and then certifying that credential or to use it in many other instances to present proof of identity at the time of a specific interaction. Those credentials, all those classes of credentials, are bound to blockchain. Essentially, I shouldn't say all, but 99% are bound to some kind of a blockchain infrastructure where the token of the credential is released at the time of the transaction, and the owner of the credential says what part of the information of the data set that is stored is allowed to be transferred over. We're definitely seeing a lot of adoption there, and with mobile driver's licenses and a lot of enterprises that are leveraging verifiable credentials in age verification, or the way Clear has done it. Again, that's not a blockchain, but the same concept to board a plane, a reusable identity kind of thing that is very transaction, or let's just say kind of like one-time oriented. Then you have a whole other mechanism around so that's really decentralized identity as opposed to decentralized biometrics. You will not hear about decentralized biometrics and blockchain in the same sentence because a whole variety of reasons, starting with you don't want your biometric on a blockchain, principally. But even if you kind of got over that and you said, okay, then practically speaking, biometrics involve not just the storage of information, but they also involve the processing of information. We talked about biometric authentication before, which is one-to-one matching, but there is also a whole other a whole other functionality around biometrics, which is one-to-many lookup. So one-to-one answers the question, is Blair who he claims to be? One-to-many answers the question, have I seen this person in a gallery before? And that's really, really important, even in the identity verification realm, because people can come in with creating these Frankenstein identities. And they will use real information combined with fake information. But the one thing that we know will be real because of Blair's liveness technology will be their face. And so that would be the consistent thing that that could be referenced later. So with this one-to-many capability, you're able to search for block lists, you're able to search for duplicates, you're able to search for synthetics. So having the ability to actually process biometric information necessitates a different technique than blockchain. And these techniques, there have been emerging, Anonybit is not the only one that is trying to solve this problem, but I think that our technique is the most scalable and does support, when we talk about the whole user lifecycle, our approach, I believe, is the most applicable across the widest range of use cases. So we can talk about some of the other techniques like tokenization, for example, involve taking a biometric token, homomorphic encryption, which essentially overcomes the negatives of standard encryption, in which you can do the matching in an encrypted manner. But homomorphic is reliant on specific algorithms, and it's been proven to be very slow. And so when you're dealing with extremely large data sets or real-time needs, it could be problematic. So the approach we've taken is a combination of what's called multi-party computation and zero-knowledge proofs. And what this allows us to do is essentially eliminate the whole idea of biometric templates to begin with. Instead of figuring out where to store these things, what we do is we take the biometric and we shard it into anonymized derivatives, or what we call anonymized bits. That's why the name of the company is Anonybit. We distribute these bits over a multi-party cloud environment where each party has their own independent function. So just to keep it really simple, if we sharded the face into 3 pieces, and Chris had a piece and Blair had a piece and I had a piece, we would be independent parties. And then if somebody wanted to do a match, then Chris, you would say whether your piece matches, Blair would say whether his piece matches, and I would say whether my piece match. And we would all give the system our responses, and the system would compile it. And because it's biometrics, we would only need a majority, 2 out of the 3 of us, to say yes in order for the person to be properly authenticated. And what's really interesting about this approach is that we can use this approach to do one-to-one as well as one-to-many, and we can also use this approach to store other types of information or data, like raw images, document scans, any payment token or passkey, or any kind of PII. So this makes the ability to support the entire life cycle from the onboarding all the way through account recovery actually possible. So kind of putting it all together, Anonybit can serve as the back end to Authentic ID's digital onboarding capability, whereby all of the images and the data can now be stored safely with Anonybit. And the enterprise can then leverage it for any of the use cases we talked about before, whether it's step-up authentication, contact center authentication, getting a new SIM card, maybe biometrically authenticating an OTP. So there are many, many different ways to leverage the data once you actually have it stored securely. So it really unleashes a lot of use cases that most of us have been clamoring for, but haven't been able to necessarily move forward with because of the fear of storing and managing biometrics.
Absolutely. So I want to get some thoughts from you, Blair, about how that implementation plays out from your end, and what the, what's attractive in terms of the practical benefits. But I think it's worth sort of re-emphasizing that, because to bring it back, what you were saying, Francis, to the threat of data breaches, in a scenario where we imagine, like a nation state attacks, using the three of us as sort of examples of nodes or servers, right? You get some major attack, and an anonybit, if you will, is somehow retrieved by a malicious party. They can't use it to do any perform any identity fraud against me, because they don't know that it's mine. It's anonymized, right? And furthermore, they can't then turn around and do something with the biometric data, because it's not complete, right? It's just a shard. Is that a fair way to characterize that?
Are you addressing me or Blair?
I'm sorry, I'm addressing you first, Francis.
Yeah, so one of the, again, the uniqueness of doing it the way we're doing it with the multi-party is that, unlike there's no encryption key, there is no single, even an insider can't have access to the entire system. So if one shard gets compromised, the rest of the system is not compromised. And actually, I was keeping the example really simple with the three of us, but there's actually a lot of redundancy built into the way this is architected. So if one of us is not available, that doesn't mean that you cannot perform a match. And also, where and how the data is stored is also controlled by specific parties. So it's you can comply with data residency requirements, and from a privacy, from a regulatory perspective, there is it doesn't even rise to the level of a breach, again, because if one of us gets compromised, it's not like the rest of us are now exposed.
So it's essentially unhackable, you might say.
Really quantum resistant, and definitely, who knows what will happen in 50 years, but right now, I think that if there's an enterprise that is storing their information with Anonybit, the fraudster will just go somewhere else. It's too difficult.
Yeah, they'll go find the low-hanging fruit for sure. So Blair, Francis referred to the scale requirements. For a company like yours, your customers have very practical everyday concerns that these scale and speed needs have to be met. So can you tell us a bit more about what service providers need out of any method of authentication to protect them from hacking, and to be sure not just that it works on that front, but that the business and the end users that they serve are actually able to get the benefit out of it?
Sure. Start the first part of the question again,
So
Chris. I was trying to
just
answer your last one first.
Yeah, I sort of tied it around in a knot, but basically we've got scale and speed and all these other concerns. So can you, maybe talk to what those concerns are, other concerns that businesses have when they're, trying to make use of these sort of modern approaches and, decentralized technologies and so on?
Yeah, I think great question, Chris, and thanks for asking that and reposing it for me.
More intelligibly, maybe.
Terrific question. And it's particularly applicable to us at Authentic ID, given that we serve very, very large enterprises. For example, we serve Treasury, IRS. I mean, that takes scale. Right now, we're getting pounded with millions and millions of transactions per day. We service all the telcos in North America. When Apple drops a new phone, the volumes just spike and go crazy. And we're mission critical. Without being able to prove your identity, I can't sell you a phone. So we're absolutely mission critical in all of those relationships that I just described. So scale is absolutely important, but something that I think is even more important these days is accuracy, and it comes down to bias. Nobody wants to make the wrong decision here, and there's been a lot of talk and a lot of chatter, and call it what you want, about the accuracy and effectiveness of biometrics over the years. So it's a big concern. many of these new modalities, privacy enhancing technologies, she mentioned FHE, and there are a lot of different ways to pull this off, but they end up having to write their own matching algorithms, which tend not to perform quite as well as some of the tried and true biometric companies that have been serving the US government for years. They have been studied by NIST and proven that they perform equally on males and females and young people versus old people and anybody from any one of 6 different skin tones. And for our customers, that accuracy is the most important concern when they start thinking about implementing biometrics. And I think, Francis, you missed out on one of the really important use cases for your technology, passwordless login too. We mentioned, account recovery and some of those really high risk transactions, but why not use it for passwordless login as well? But we love what Francis has created. The dedupe, I'll just double down on that. We see this all the time. We see 150 different identity documents with the same face on it all the time. These people are very bold. This is what they do for a living. They are persistent and they're going to continue. So the scale and the bias are 2 super important things when it comes to implementing privacy enhancing technology. And more importantly, the bias that just has to go away. And Francis, we're going to be talking about regulations at some point here, and you've thrown me for a curve here. I don't know what PIPEDA or PIPEDA is, so you'll have to fill me in on that one at some point.
Canada.
Canada. Okay. Got it.
Yeah, Canadian regulations. So, there are a lot of regulations. Whether it's PIPEDA in Canada or BIPA in the United States. This is causing a lot of headaches for businesses, and it's eroding confidence as well. But I'd like your thoughts, Blair, on what those regulations really say regarding the use of biometrics.
They're all over the place, Chris. Do we have a slide on that, by the way? I think we do, if you wouldn't mind. I mean, they are just really all over the place. We can stop on this one really quick. No, this one isn't it, but just want to point out the fact that when we poll consumers, their number one choice for reauthentication isn't passwords. It's not multi-factor authentication. It's literally biometrics. So Francis and I are clapping today because 20 years ago, that wasn't the case. Glad to see that improved. But yeah, go to the next slide if you would.
Right. Okay, here we are. Yeah.
There we go. So it's just all over the place, Chris. We have people like BIPA, you mentioned them, that have the most onerous biometric storage regulation in the country. I forget exactly what, I think it's $1,000 for every time that we use that face. So if you think about the company that had you punch in using your face to come into work, every day that you came into work, they can be fined $1,000. Texas is taking a very strict look at the use of biometrics. Portland, which we don't even see the dot here on this slide, but Portland has enacted the most obscene biometric privacy law that I've ever seen. Most places allow the use of biometrics if a couple of conditions exist. First of all, the consumer has consented. That's first and foremost. The consumer must know that they're offering their biometrics, they're going to be reused, and they've got to have explicit consent. Oh gosh, I completely forgot where I was going with the second part of that.
I'll help you.
Thank you.
Say some of them. So consent is, it actually, the regulations don't say you cannot use biometrics, which is like
even BIPA. Right?
Yeah, it's a misconception. The regulations actually talk about a couple of things. So depending. So number one, they all have consent. That's like across the board, whether it's GDPR or BIPA or California or Australia, South Africa, they all require consent, number one. Number two, they all talk about this notion of use the biometric for the purpose of which it was collected, meaning do not share, sell, or if you're collecting the biometric for a loyalty program within your retail, then don't all of a sudden have the manufacturer send you coupons. That is not the intent. And then there are number three that you see across the board is a notion called the right to know or the right to be forgotten, where anybody should be able to request what information is available on them and to delete their information either when the service is ended, like with a bank, the bank should delete their biometric altogether, or if they just don't want to use that biometric anymore. So these are like the three basic, and then some of the laws around the world have this concept around data residency, where the data for process should be kept within the jurisdiction in which it was collected. So you see that in Germany, you see that in Brazil. So there are definitely, it's a hodgepodge. So on the one hand, the regulations are all over the place, but on the other hand, if you actually parse them all out, there are very specific things that they all have in common, which is just kind of like now should be like, the fundamentals of how you deploy biometrics responsibly.
So it's consent, use, residency primarily. But then you take Portland, which is where I was going last time, and they've just outlawed biometrics altogether. It doesn't matter if you've got a permissible purpose, if the consumer opts in, it doesn't matter if you've consented. They've just taken this stance against it blanketly, I think, an uninformed stance.
We'll see.
In the previous slide, we saw that consumers actually prefer biometrics. So we saw that on the previous slide.
And we'll see how long that Portland law lasts and how it plays out. But I think it's it's really important to note that all of these requirements, whether it be consent or data residency, they're all ultimately geared towards increasing the confidence that businesses and consumers can have. Maybe not what they're doing in Portland, but what they're doing in general with these regulations is trying to enable an environment in which everyone can be comfortable performing biometric authentication, right? So, so given what Blair and Francis, you have each been talking about, it sounds like, complying with the, all of these concerns is not just doable today, but Anonybit and Authentic ID are already offering compliance solutions that meet all of these requirements and therefore give stakeholders the confidence that they need to authenticate their users.
Yeah,
is that a fair way to put that?
Yeah, and it should actually be noted that depending on the law, biometrics are considered, yet a higher level of personal information, and they must be kept and stored in a different way and regarded in a different way than just standard PII. And the fines, so there are different fines. The BIPA fine is very much related to consent, and almost like all of the BIPA lawsuits are related to people not getting consent. But then if you look at GDPR, those fines are around data breaches. And so how you store and how you manage that data is really, really important, even after you've gotten the consent. So yes, the way that we are working together ensures that our joint customers are able to meet and exceed even the letter of the law.
So you can
We're
authenticate.
Fully supportive.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, Chris.
No problem. We are running towards the top of the hour, so I'd actually like to take a few minutes now just to go over a few of the questions submitted by our attendees. So thank you to all of you who asked questions. So let's start with this one. What is, which is a question about how much generative AI is involved in the rise of synthetic identity fraud, as referred to earlier by you, Blair. What about that relationship, and are financial institutions able to identify and report AI-driven identity fraud?
We can absolutely stop the use of AI fraud given certain conditions. We have certain customers that, due to requirements by the government, allow users to upload any sort of image possible. So you could literally upload an image that was created on your phone or on your computer and use that for proof of identity. That's much less secure. We do document authenticity, so we make sure that when somebody's taking a picture of their identity document, it's a real identity document, which stops a huge loophole and a huge vulnerable fraud vector, if you will. And then we're going to stop any sort of synthetic face attack. So companies can be confident that we're going to be able to protect them, and people can reliably authenticate. And if we use privacy enhancing technologies like Anonymized to store that sharded biometric template, it's the perfect marriage, really, of fraud prevention and user experience. The user gets to authenticate just as they open up their phone, but the customer at the end of the day has solid proof of precisely who transacted, not who had the right credentials to log into the account or had the right OTP.
So that's how the financial institutions are identifying this AI-driven identity fraud. Is you're telling them?
We're telling them. Before it ever becomes a problem, we tell them, and that person never gets onboarded to become a customer of the bank. You don't want to onboard something synthetic.
Absolutely. Okay, let's see here. We've got understanding how the exchange works between trading privacy for luxury, which I think we might say convenience, in terms of data sharing and data uses by businesses. How do we raise clearer awareness for consumers on how this works? And how can we evolve this communication so businesses and consumers can hopefully be more aligned on the implications of how data is used in real life for authentication and full cycle verification? Francis, would you like to weigh in on that one?
So I've been doing this myself right now, but I've been doing this for 25 years. This month is 25 years.
Congratulations.
And I would say that over the years, the number one thing is to be upfront with consumers on what you're collecting. And this is why I really am a proponent of these privacy regs, because I think a lot of them really just have to do with be upfront on what you're doing, what you're collecting, what is the purpose of which you're collecting the data for. And I think that garners consumer trust. Like, we don't want a Cambridge Analytica scenario where, like, that's just bad. And that wasn't about biometrics, but I mean, we all know about it, and we were all like, none of us like it. And so now take it to the world of biometrics. So it's just like, I think if we are upfront with consumers and we're saying, we are using your selfie, your face, or whatever other biometric it could be your, we see palm now in payments and whatever, voice, it doesn't matter. But just to be upfront, we are collecting your face to verify your identity to open the account, which is what consent Blair's team already gets every single time they are doing an identity verification. And we will store this face and use this face on an ongoing basis. So when you call us back, this is what we're using to authenticate you. I think, today, many consumers are using their face to authenticate themselves to open their phone. Like, most of us understand this concept already. So it's just a matter of being upfront in what you're doing. And, there's never any 100% with anything, but we know from all of the deployments of biometrics, when given the choice, an overwhelming majority will use biometric for the convenience as well as the security. So when customers ask me this, I say, yes, out of the gate, off the bat, you will get somewhere between 50 to 70% adoption without even like really trying, because this is what most consumers want. And then you will have the second round of, people that will, like, the longer tail that will adopt. And then maybe you'll have the 1 or 2% that will never do it for a whole variety of reasons. But if you can improve your operational efficiency and get rid of the fraud and satisfy 50 to 70% of your customers, that goes a long way to both the top and the bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. Blair, do you want to weigh in on that one, or Francis?
She's gone off on that one. Here's another one that we didn't cover. Our financial institutions adopt. No, I'm sorry, wrong one. Oh goodness, there was just a really good question up here. So it was asking if people with disabilities, if they're unable to authenticate using certain modalities. And I thought that was a good question. Not really. I can't think of a certain situation where WCAG compliant, if somebody has sight issues and can't take a picture of their face, they can talk into the device. And then we have, both haptic and sounds that we use to drive people into being able to take a picture of their face. So yeah, it can be a problem for somebody with disabilities, but we've done our best to make it super simple and easy for everybody.
Absolutely. So let's I think we should address the question that you started to read off there, which is, are financial institutions adopting Anonybit and Authentic IDs services, and what obstacles do you see? Would you like to start on that one, Blair?
I think the obstacles are the same as they've always been. It's just been education. We need to educate the consumer, make sure the consumer understands the risks and the benefits. There aren't any risks. We don't misuse your data. There's nothing but benefits for consumers. And I think that enterprises still need to be educated a little bit. They're gun shy. They realize that it's the best modality. It's the easiest for the consumer. It's the best way to cut fraud. But they're worried about that central honeypot and being on the front page of the New York Times. And technologies like Anonybits eliminate that central honeypot. So I'm very excited about our collaboration with FIs moving forward.
Francis?
I've experienced a really interesting phenomenon in the last month or so, where more and more enterprises, financial institutions, and not are asking for, like, biometric 101. I feel like we're taking this for granted in the industry because, a lot of us are doing, like, document verification, and we're doing this every day. But I think that as we get more and more into the use cases, like, there really is an education on the consumers just want to know, they just want to know the bottom line. Where's my data stored? How are you using it? And whatnot. They're not necessarily interested in all of the intricacies and stuff like that. But I think that there are a lot of questions around what is a biometric? What is the difference between one-to-one, one-to-many? What is liveness? What is generative AI? Like, what is this? Like, what are we talking about? How do we prevent it? What are the attacks that we really, really, really need to be worried about? What is hype versus, reality? If I had a biometric mechanism to authenticate people, how automated is that really allowed to be? Like, there's FCRA requirements and things where an AI can't make, a decision. So what does that mean in terms of, the human element? And then you get into the privacy, and then it was all the kind of things that Blair was talking about: bias, accuracy. Where do I go to see, like, how can I tell how accurate a biometric, really is? And, that's part of the reason Anonybit decided we're not going to focus on algorithmic development. We will leave it to the people who do it best, and we will focus on the architecture. But I do find myself really giving a lot of biometric 101. And so to anybody on the call, I'm actually thinking about doing these ongoing seminars, and anybody here who's interested is very invited to join.
It's a good idea, and I think you've hit the nail on the head, Francis. Very easy to overlook when you're kind of in the middle of it, how remote some of these concepts are from a lot of people's day to day. Just very, very quickly, Blair, you referred to Portland earlier. We do have a question. Portland, Oregon, or Portland, Maine?
It's Portland, Oregon.
Okay, I thought so, but I wasn't 100%, so I wanted to let you take that. And you know what, we're running out of time, but I want to ask one last question for Francis. If the pieces of a template are distributed across multiple systems, how do you address the latency issue during biometric authentication, especially in the case of one-to-N with millions and millions of identities for a platform? So in a deduplication type scenario, say.
So just to put it very simply, and happy to get off talk about this offline, but very simply, this is all done in real time. So a one-to-one match can be done in under 100 milliseconds, and a one-to-many match can be done in a couple of hundred milliseconds. This is all Kubernetes, it's all scalable, and there really is not any significant latency.
So again, back to some of the things we were discussing earlier about this approach, bringing some practical benefits that are very difficult to find in some different other approaches, let's say. Well,
just to point out, I mean,
yes,
the human mind takes 300 milliseconds to even realize time. So she's faster than a human can realize that they've been authenticated.
I'm going to use that stat in the future, Blair. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good one. Real time defined. So we've been at this for more than the hour we promised. So I think we should wrap up. But I just really want to mention that if you look in the chat, we have their links to demos, both for Authentic ID and for Anonybit. AuthenticID.com/request-demo and anonybit.io/request-a-demo. Check both of those demos out. Please do reach out to Blair and Francis for further discussion. And I want to thank both of you. Thank you, Blair, and thank you, Francis, for sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Francis.
Thank you.
Well, and thank you to all of you who joined and who posed questions and participated in our earlier guessing game and our poll. We will be back soon to talk about the various opportunities and challenges in biometrics and digital ID. So until then, stay safe and have fun.
Take care,
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.